Hello you all, my name is Antonello Mastronardi. I'm a PhD candidate in classical studies at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where I'm also enrolled in the Museum Studies graduate program. I'm thrilled to join the ANAMED community this fall in order to work on my PhD dissertation project, entitled Social Struggle and Economic Exploitation in Western Anatolian Communities During the Mithridatic Wars, 88 to 63 BCE. We'll go back to that later. Now a little about me as a scholar, why not, as a human being. Before moving to the US, I got both my BA and MA degrees in Italy, where I'm from, if you weren't able to tell yourself from my accent. More specifically from the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore of Milan. As you might know, Italian academia is particularly the humanities, is very focused on giving you philological training, a text-oriented training. I make no exception. That was my training, but my interests shifted more and more towards the study of ancient politics and economics. And as you can imagine, you cannot do much with historiography when it comes to that. I got more and more interested in material evidence, in particular in the study of coins, of ancient coinage, of numismatics, both from an iconographic perspective, but also from a quantitative perspective. And I got to the point that I believe that in order to respond to the very widespread tendency, scholarly need, we might say, to go beyond, or if you prefer, below the elites when we look at the antiquities. Studies in the antiquities so far have, tended until the previous generation to stay at the elite level. This is our generation attempt to go below that. I believe that quantitative studies in particular, of course, not necessarily by themselves, put together with literature, put together with other more qualitative approaches, but a quantitative component is, I would say, necessary in order to get to know what was below the level of the elites, how the real common people of the time lived. And this is basically a tentative transition back to my dissertation. I will repeat the title, Social Struggle and Economic Exploitation in Western Anatolian Communities During the Mithridatic Wars, 88 to 63 BCE, because I intend to clarify some of the keywords of the title. Not all of you need to know about, Turkish antiquities. It's not mandatory, or antiquities in general. I keep repeating, you can come to this world and get out of this world, die, without knowing of antiquities, and you're going to be just fine. Of course, you're going to miss out on something, but it's a matter of taste, right? On the other hand, though, I think that it's important here for me to clarify some of the keywords of my title. What were the Mithridatic Wars, and why the Mithridatic Wars? Well, 88 to 63 BCE, these are the dates that I indicated in my title. Basically, we have in this time span 3 different conflicts, almost without a break between each other, though, between 2 major powers, not only in Anatolia, but I would say in the Mediterranean of the time, namely the Romans, and on the other hand, the king of Pontus, the famous or infamous, according to the perspective, Mithridates VI Eupator. As you can imagine, this 30 years of conflict inevitably reshaped the local periods, both in terms of social structure and in terms of local economics. And then going back in my title, why Western Anatolian communities? Why not another part of Anatolia? At the end of the day, Mithridates was from the Black Sea, from Pontus, as I said. Well, these Western Anatolian communities, these cities, the Greek-speaking cities of the West, were the cities that first the Romans acquired 50 years, more or less 50 years before my time of interest, when they installed the so-called Provincia Asiae, province of Asia, in Western Anatolia. These were the primary target of both parties. The Romans wanted to preserve them from Mithridates. Mithridates wanted to conquer them from the Romans during these 30 years of wars that I work on. Therefore, my attempt is to study how the wars reshaped those communities, those Western communities, at an economic level, at a social level, how the exploitation of both parties affected their historical path, right? How did it happen? Well, of course, the conflict itself, as I said, progressively found its epicenter in these cities, which were florid, which were wealthy, which were also perceived by the Romans as closer to them than the inner Anatolian communities, right? And therefore, both parties focused on gaining local support by appealing to certain social groups at a local level, translating the military conflict into a sort of bidding war, which was fought both on political and economic terms. And now, we have to say something, though, here. Traditional scholarship tends to give a very pejorative portrayal of Mithridates, of course. You know, like the biggest enemy of Rome ever, the deadliest enemy of Rome ever, the Poison King, as a very excellent, a very successful biography of the king was titled a few years ago. And of course, part of this very biased description tends to see Mithridates as a quasi-populist instigator towards these Western cities, and vice versa. The Romans are seen as like a political subject who speaks only with the local elites. Well, I aim to invert this narrative. I aim to demonstrate that both parties were in fact appealing to marginalized groups with the promise of better conditions in exchange for their allegiance. These bids, which could take the form of debt cancellations, enfranchisement, sophisticated kinds of monetary interventions, inevitably altered the socio-economic picture of Western Anatolian communities in the years to come. This altered picture, the way in which the war impacted these communities at a social and economic level, is exactly the end game, the target, the scholarly target of my project. In order, as I said, to pursue such a project, I necessarily had to start getting my hands dirty with material evidence over the last 4 or 5 years, heavily so, especially with numismatics, and of course with Anatolian studies as well. And this is exactly why I decided to join the Notion excavation project during this summer, a couple of months ago. I came back exactly a month ago, actually. This excavation project, just 50-60 kilometers south of Izmir, in the modern village of Ahmet Bailey, is directed by Professor Christopher Ratte, who's in my committee, as well as Professor David Potter, who's the chair of my dissertation committee. So Professor Chris Ratte directed this project for the University of Michigan, but the project was also directed by the University of Sinop and University of Adnan Menderes in Aydın. That's where I got my, first real acquaintance with Turkish academia. I started a dialogue with Turkish scholars, and I see my participation in the ANAMED community in full continuity with this project. I see my participation in the ANAMED community as a great opportunity for me to continue this dialogue with people who know much more than I do about Turkish issues and can give me a much more insightful perspective on my subjects of interest. I'm looking forward to being there and to meeting you all, and I thank you all for your time. Bye.